In this video, we're going to be exploring the fifth largest Irish diaspora on the planet, one that's often overlooked, Argentina. You might be surprised to hear that Irish culture is well and strong in Argentina.
It is very important to everyone I met here that they call themselves Irish, that the club will continue to celebrate Irish culture, the Irish dance, Irish singing.
And it can all be traced back to the 1800s. But why is that? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking into. We're going to go back over 200 years to before and around the years of the Great Hunger to understand how it all started. We're going to look at the people responsible for creating the secret Irish community that thrived there under a British passport. We're also going to listen to rare recordings of the actual music that came from this region and era, thanks to an amazing Irish collector and her father. And to top it all off, we're going to look at the modern Irish music scene in Argentina through three talented singers. Before we get into the music and culture, let's first just try and understand a few things. Why Argentina of all places? Why and how did Irish people end up there? And where in Ireland did they come from? When we're thinking of the movement of people from Ireland to places like the United States and United Kingdom, let's take Newfoundland for example, where those who went primarily came from counties like Waterford and Wexford in the south and southeast and went to work and usually stayed there. Whereas other families throughout the 1800s, especially in the years of the Great Hunger, many families were torn apart and boarded coffin ships to move to the United States, for example. These were people with no other choice and no real initial prospect of work in comparison to those who were going between Newfoundland, let's say. When we're talking about Argentina, it was like a third path, and it was specific to the Midlands of Ireland. 61% of them came from Westmeath, Longford and Offaly, with a further 16% coming from Wexford. This movement reached its height between 1843 and 1879, driven by the wool revolution in the River Plate area. The River Plate, or Rio de la Plata, the River of Silver. When I mention this area, I want you to imagine this area here. Basically, this entire region surrounding this estuary, which comprises the modern nations of Argentina and Uruguay. Anyway, wool prices increased massively between 1830 and 1880. So how I picture it is that fishermen went to Newfoundland and the shepherds went to Argentina. But it is a little bit more complex than just that. Unlike the desperate flight of the starving populace during the Great Hunger, comparing the majority who went to the United States and United Kingdom, for example, the migration to Argentina was different. It was mostly a calculated and economic move by a somewhat slightly higher social class. The emigrants were the younger, non-inheriting sons and later daughters of middle-sized farmers and leaseholders. Because they were not in line to inherit the farm, their options were really limited throughout the 1800s. Plain and simple, there wasn't much else they could do, bar join the British Army or join the priesthood. I don't know about you, but I'd take Argentina any day. But there was something a bit more than the work that attracted people there. Land acquisition was easier there than in other places. Two men responsible for recruiting people to go there, General John Thomond O'Brien and Patrick Buckie from Westmeath, basically spread the word that Argentina offered the opportunity for social mobility and land ownership that was, let's be honest, impossible in Ireland during the 1800s. We mentioned the wool revolution a minute ago. This was the primary engine behind it all. The majority of these emigrants already had these skills, so they were going to excel in Argentina. And with the prospect of having their own land and just more opportunity in life in general, going there was really attractive. Upon arriving, there was a system that immigrants entered into, a sharecropping arrangement known as halves or thirds. Basically, instead of receiving a fixed wage, the shepherd would care for the flock and essentially receive half or a third of the produce and the newborn lambs. This allowed Irish labourers to amass capital really fast and transition from shepherds to renting land out and eventually purchasing land to become very wealthy landowners, or estancieros. Us Irish, we know our sheep. There basically isn't a field on the island that doesn't have at least one sheep. Joking aside, even back then, the Irish immigrants excelled and it proved highly successful. Keep that image in your head. Let's focus on the contrast of those who boarded coffin ships to North America. First of all, the cost to get to the River Plate was expensive. From what I found, the cost was between £16 and £35. I did a little looking online just to understand how much that actually was in today's money, and it turned out to be somewhere between €2,400 and €5,000. So even today, that's very expensive. It's basically a business class airplane ticket. The poor, unfortunate and less educated went to the United States on these coffin ships. They just couldn't afford it. And as well as that, they may not even have had the skills required to go to Argentina. The Argentine Irish were generally better educated and had more money in comparison to their counterparts heading to North America. You'd imagine that the longer route to River Plate would be more difficult than the shorter route to North America, but the vessels heading to Argentina were judged to be in better condition. Ships that I found made the journey, such as the William Peel or the La Zingara, where in contrast on the coffin ships, disease was rampant and between 5 and 30% of people died on the shorter route to the United States. A key figure you're going to hear a lot more about throughout this video is Father Anthony Fahy. He was a community leader in Argentina throughout these peak years, and alongside him was another key figure, Thomas Armstrong. Both of these men had learned how to organize colonies during their time in the United States. Father Fahy actively discouraged migration to the United States, warning that the Irish there faced hardships and unfriendliness, where in Argentina they would find a home amongst other fellow Catholics and government protection. And he wasn't wrong. These two men were essentially the architects of it all. We'll touch more on them in a bit, but first, why were the Irish here treated differently than, let's say, the Irish who emigrated to the United States and United Kingdom, where they were met with signs like "No Irish need apply"? We'll start with the passport. As we mentioned, emigrating to Argentina wasn't a desperate act as such. It was a calculated survival strategy. Because Ireland was part of the United Kingdom, they arrived with British passports. Many of the newcomers either declared themselves to be Ingleses, English, or were just assumed to be English by the authorities. This gave the Irish arriving here a huge advantage. The authorities couldn't tell the difference between the Irish, the English, the Scottish or the Welsh even. Britain was Argentina's primary trading partner, and British citizens enjoyed significant commercial prestige and protection. The Irish here leveraged these privileges of the English merchant class, while also importantly holding on to and leveraging their Catholicism to integrate with the Argentine community. This gave them a unique privileged status over other immigrant groups. Not only that, the War of the Triple Alliance at the time, when Paraguay fought against Argentina, Brazil and Uruguay between 1864 and 1870, the fact that these Irish were, on paper, British because of the passports meant that they could completely avoid military service. A really interesting thing about that war as well, a woman called Elisa Lynch, who was born in Charleville in County Cork, had moved to Paris around the age of 10 to escape the Great Hunger. While there, she met the son of the president of Paraguay in France and followed him back to Paraguay. Though they never married, she was the de facto first lady for 15 years. She also led the Las Residentas in this war, a group of women who supported the soldiers. But I won't go too much into it, but it's interesting how another Irish person with connections to the surname Lynch had an impact in the course of history in South America, the other being Che Guevara, though it's worth mentioning that the two aren't directly connected and come from different branches of the Lynch family. One's from Cork and the other's from Galway. It's still a really cool side bit there. I did end up going down a South American Irish rabbit hole there, as you can probably tell. But anyway, now let's look at the two men who were essentially the architects behind this. Father Fahy was a Dominican priest who had arrived in 1844. He provided the social engineering and the moral discipline of the Irish community that was to come. Thomas Armstrong was a banker, a wealthy Protestant merchant and director of the provincial bank. He provided the money, the financial machinery. Armstrong was a family friend of Fahy's from back home, either from Offaly or Westmeath. The two worked together. Fahy would purchase property in his own name, to hold in trust for his parishioners. This would also protect them from local exploitation and taxes. The capital generated from these dealings was then lodged into Armstrong's bank and used to finance new Irish settlers. This essentially created a closed-loop economic system that grew rapidly. Father Fahey established himself as the undisputed leader. In some articles I read, he was described as the Irish king of the community. It's worth noting that he wasn't the only priest here as well at the time, and many more came over the years. But he was essentially the leader. His authority was total. He wasn't just the priest, he was also essentially the postmaster, financial advisor, marriage counsellor, judge, interpreter, and employment agent. He lived rent-free in a home provided by Thomas Armstrong, which served as the headquarters over his control of the diaspora in Argentina. The community was organised into 12 sections or chaplaincies across the Buenos Aires province. This ensured that even in the more remote areas, they all remained under his strict moral and social supervision. I had come across some mention of this 7-year rule as well, but I couldn't find too much on it. Essentially, the immigrants had to work for 7 years before they had actually proved their worth, their financial worth, kind of combined with this sharecropping that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. Basically, if they proved themselves, then after the 7 years of work, they had accumulated enough capital that they could then marry and establish themselves as essentially their own landlords. But the marriage story is an interesting one. Fahey had viewed the mixing of Irish with the natives, or even the heretics, the Protestant British, as a threat to the community's spiritual integrity. To prevent diluting the culture, he enforced a strict policy of endogamy, marry within the group. But alas, when there was not enough Irish women, Fahey sent contact back to Ireland to arrange for the emigration of young women, specifically for marriage. Fahey had connection to Loughrea, and it was mentioned when I was reading about this that he famously imported shiploads of women from his native town of Loughrea and the parish of Kileenadima in Galway to provide suitable wives for the successful shepherds who passed their 7 years of trials in a way. I also found this line which is associated with him. He said to marry early, and marry from their own stock and creed. But in the run-up to the end of his years, his authoritarian control over the community really shone through. He was ruthless, and it was most darkly illustrated by the 1848 execution of Camila O'Gorman. Camila was from a wealthy family, and she ran away with a young priest, Ladislao Gutierrez. The dictator at the time, Juan Manuel de Rosas, viewed this violation as a threat to his regime. Rosas had consulted with Father Fahey about this, and he, along with many other members of the clergy, had agreed that exemplary punishment needed to be shown to prevent any more future scandals. 23-year-old Camila was ordered to be executed. It was known that Camila was 8 months pregnant. She was executed anyway. Rosas claimed sole responsibility over it. It is known that Father Fahey, along with others from the clergy, had put a lot of pressure on the decision-making behind it. But it just goes to show how much control was had over the community in the early days. Folklore mentions that he died tending to the sick during the yellow fever epidemic in 1871. However, his death certificate ultimately mentions heart disease. From her death in 1848 to Fahey passing away in 1871, a lot happened. He had set in motion a chain of events which I wonder was he even aware of. Although Fahey wasn't artistic, he didn't play music, but he did preserve the culture, and that set off a domino effect.
So we all have a relative or a parent or an uncle who liked what we would vaguely call Celtic music and first introduced us to it when we were younger. Neither of us is of Irish descent and we've never been to Ireland, but we really love to visit sometime in the future.
For some reason, traditional music from your region moves us, all three of us personally, and we feel a deep connection to it, maybe because of the lyrics or the melodies or the stories that it evokes, but also because we think that music is a great way of immersing yourself in a new culture, especially when you're studying its language.
Now, if you're wondering why the beard has suddenly grown out of control, and the background looks a little bit more interesting. I took my time in putting this video together. After my last recording of this, would you believe, I stumbled across a page on the Irish Traditional Music Archive about Anne Gannon. I reached out to the ITMA after reading about Anne and asked if I could use some of the tunes that you've already heard throughout this video. And a huge thanks to everyone at the ITMA and also to Anne's family as well for giving us all the opportunity here of hearing these absolutely amazing tunes today. Her recordings are unique, they're a treasure. What makes them special, despite being the earliest recordings of Irish music by a private individual, these recordings are like an owl window, so to speak, back to this Irish community in Argentina in the 1800s. Anne was born in Carrigeen in Longford in 1915. She had donated these recordings in 2015 at 100 years old. Truly amazing. In the mid-1900s, she worked in the United States, and around 1954, she returned home to Ireland with a reel-to-reel recording machine that she had picked up in New York. Straight away, Anne started making recordings of local traditional musicians, but the recordings that stood out, and the ones that you're hearing throughout the video, are from her father, Bernard Gannon, an accordion player who had been born amongst the Irish Argentine diaspora in 1881. Bernard picked up a vast collection of tunes from the area, and when he returned home to his farm in Carrigeen, he settled down and had a family. Anne herself, the collector, was the 7th of 17 children. Through the rest of Bernard's life, he continued to play the Argentine music that he had picked up and brought home with him to Ireland. Some of the other tunes that Bernard picked up in his later years from his brother-in-law, fiddle player Christopher Kit Kelly, which you can listen to on the ITMA website. But the ones that stand out the most are the upbeat and catchy Argentine polkas and waltzes of her father. These are the only known recordings of the music played amongst the Irish diaspora in Argentina through the 1800s. I would recommend go and check them out. I will leave a link in the description down below so you can find it easily. And a huge thanks to the ITMA and to Anne's family for the music in the video. But unlike the diaspora in the United States, which ended up fusing with other cultures to create new playing styles or genres of music like bluegrass and country, for example, there has been more evidence of that. But Irish music in Argentina remained largely frozen in its traditional form. Think about this. You need inspiration from other sources of music on a large scale to change and to form these genres essentially. Music is like an accent. That's the best way I can put it. And as we already gathered, the Irish community was, for the most case, insulated in the camp by Father Fahey. For example, if you live in the east of Ireland and you ever go to Cork for a few days, you leave Cork and on the way home, you're wondering, why am I thinking to myself in a Cork accent like? Not that that's a bad thing.
Well, it's a hard one to penetrate, the Cork accent, you know. Best thing about being from Cork is, like, no matter where you are in the city, you can always walk around and you say, what do we do if the president is ever from there?
But it's just the same with music really. Consciously or not, given enough time, especially when talking about ornamentation of tunes, which is more a feeling rather than something technical that you can just brute force practice.
Folkloric music in Argentina is very diverse. We live in a vast country where each region has its own cultural roots and relations with both its native people and the immigrants who started coming at the turn of the 20th century. So it is possible to find everything from fast-paced dances to more contemplative and serene chants and compositions. Something characteristic is that many rhythms have their own specific dance that are interpreted along with the music. And in addition to that, also traditional Argentinian music relies more often in poetry and lyrics than in just instrumental renditions.
Although there is a theory that polkas and mazurkas from Ireland and further Europe did contribute rhythmically to the mixing pot of early Argentine styles like the milonga, you can argue that Irish music itself was not fused or hybridized like in the United States, for example.
Well, thematically, we can find similarities in the subject matter of songs. They may sing about love found or love lost, homesickness, the simplicity of life, distance and loss. However, there are also cheerful rhythms and songs that are played typically in celebrations or parties where people gather to dance and drink and share food. Because of the musical traditions inherited from Spain, which in turn was influenced by the Celtic peoples of Galicia, there are similarities in the use of the violin or fiddle and of the fast time signatures of rhythms like the jig in, for example, an Argentinian gato.
Irish music itself was not hybridized. Instead, it was used as a tool of cultural distinctness, played privately at communal Irish hops and family gatherings in the rural camp. As mentioned briefly before, this isolation was strategic, not just for the music. The Irish were encouraged to settle in the countryside to preserve their moral and religious values away from the corruption of the city. In the cities, tango was being born through a mix of African, Spanish and Italian influences. The Irish stayed in their rural enclaves, keeping their midland reels and jigs and whatever else have you, distinct from emerging local genres. Father Fahey wasn't a musician, but he was the architect behind preserving the culture. 20 years after his death, the Fahey Institute was founded in 1891. It was formed by the St. Joseph's Society and the Palatine Fathers to provide a Catholic education for Irish boys. In Buenos Aires today, the Fahey Institute essentially lives on as the Fahey Club, which was founded in 1941 by former students of the Fahey Institute. It's a place to take part in various activities, all showing off Irish culture, like Irish dancing and music. Even President Michael D. Higgins visited them in 2012. Also, just to show how strong Irish music is going in Argentina today, I got in touch with Alejandro, a musician in Buenos Aires, who has worked on various projects such as the International Celtic Choir back during the lockdown of 2020, and more recently his choral group Danny Boys. Their live performances focus on vocal arrangements of traditional songs, showcasing the vibrant Irish music scene in Argentina.
We met at the beginning of 2024 in a choir where all of us were singing as tenors and became friends shortly after that. As time went by, we realized that we shared an interest in similar musical genres like Irish and folk and New Age and so on. And so we took the opportunity to sing together at a fundraising event that our choir was organizing before the end of the year. That performance was very well received and we felt really comfortable. So we decided to explore the possibility of formally creating a group.
So early in 2025, we started looking for songs that we all three liked, and we started to rehearse. Even though we didn't have a specific date for a show or anything, our idea was just basically get together and have fun singing the songs that we like.
And we'll all go together to go wild mountain time, all around the blooming heather.
It was a new experience for all three of us.
We decided to name the group Danny Boys because that was the first song that we brought us together. And also we knew it carried great significance to Irish people, this song. And to this day, we feel a special connection to it. It's the song we think best defines what we are trying to create.
The pipes are calling from glen to glen and down the mountain. mountainside.
All three of us are involved when it comes to selecting the songs and making creative choices. Ale is in charge of arrangements and musical direction. Emmy opens his house for rehearsals. And I handle our social medias and sometimes also act as a vocal coach. There is a small Irish community in Buenos Aires, and we know of some bands that play traditional, mostly instrumental music, more cheerful like jigs, reels, and the like. Although it isn't widely spread genre, people here are very receptive to artistic expressions from other cultures. They show interest in hearing and learning about it.
I think if we had the chance to perform in Ireland, we would start with The Last Rose of Summer, which is a favorite of ours because of its poetic lyrics and expressive melody. Maybe we would also like to share with you some of the songs from our own folklore because, they're beautiful and we love the idea of that rich cultural exchange.
Our goal has always been to enjoy making music we love with friends, and hopefully transmit that passion to the audience. Although they might know nothing, for example, about the genre or the lyrics, we hope to be able to convey our love, fascination for this music to the people and be a gateway to the genre for those who didn't know about it. For example, like us when we were younger.
I think we had a bit of a tough time learning the parting glass because we all had in our heads like different versions of it that we had heard. So it was hard to reconcile the phrasing and the tempo and so on. Also, it was the last song that we rehearsed before our first concert, just a few days before.
Gently rise and softly call. Good night and joy be to you all.
Well, at first I tried to listen to different versions of the song to have a wider outlook on different directions the song might take. And then I start writing the arrangement. When it comes to writing the lines, I always try to give at least a solo moment for each of us, and then that we each have an interesting melody to sing, whether it's the harmonics or the bass line. I don't like when one does the whole melody and the other has to sing a more boring part, so to say. I also know our voices very well by now, so I know who of us has a strong point in one area or the other, so it comes easier to come up with the arrangements. Well, we hope to continue researching and learning more about Irish songs and culture so we can bring a more fully realized and interesting proposal to the audience. Also, we want to explore other related styles and genres of music.
Our idea for the next year is to make several concerts in our city and collaborate with other musicians while being open to whatever may come.
Yeah. Yes, we want whoever listens to this music because of us to feel inspired to dig deeper and into like the very interesting and fascinating world that is Irish music.
You have to admit the lads are talented. If you want to hear more of their music, please check out the description for links to their music and follow them on Instagram. But even the Wolf Tones had made their way over to Argentina, and one of their most popular songs tells of this amazing history as well. Their 1892 song, Admiral William Brown, for a start. The song honours Admiral Brown, who was a native of Foxford in County Mayo, who is revered as the father of the Argentine Navy.
Here he is remembered fondly for his role in the defense of our lands against the British invasion. There are various songs and marches that pay tribute to him. For example, the march Admiral William Brown. But also, he has an honor here in by Argentinian composers. For example, with the March of St. Patrick.
He was a merchant and a sailor who led Argentina's naval forces during its War of Independence and against Brazil. The song follows his departure from Mayo, his arrival at River Plate, and his victories against invaders. Crucially here, the song was released during the Falklands Malvinas War in 1982 and takes a strictly pro-Argentine, anti-British stance. The chorus asserts Argentina's sovereignty over the islands, Las Islas Malvinas Argentinas. It explicitly links Irish and Argentine history by referencing the British invasions of 1806 and mentioning that the Irish know the full story regarding British imperialism. As you can imagine, the song was a top hit in Ireland and banned on British radio. When you ban a song, it only makes it more popular. When will they ever learn? In Argentina, the song remains a viral sensation on platforms like TikTok. Just goes to show the connection between Argentina and Ireland is stronger than you might think. Also, another thing I found interesting, in the Newfoundland video I mentioned about the Hiberno English that is strong in the area. It's also fairly common in Argentina too. The camp refers to the countryside. Giving out is another one used by descendants who otherwise spoke Spanish. And the accent as well. I had read of accounts that all the way up to the 1960s, some areas spoke Spanish with a lilt similar to that in Westmeath. But all in all, you love to see it. The music and culture still growing strong. We can argue that it is the way it is because of Fahy's authoritarian rule over the small 5,000 to 10,000 shepherd community back in the early 1800s. But something I only recently learned and was amazed by, that today Argentina has the 5th largest Irish diaspora in the whole world, estimated at around 1 million people. How much of it was thanks to Fahy and Armstrong? It's definitely up for debate, but let me know what you think down in the comments. Did you know that Argentina has such a huge Irish diaspora? I am genuinely curious of what you think. The cultural isolation Fahy had cultivated in the camp was transferred to the playing field, not in the form of football, but hurling. Hurling teams were formed, such as Fahy's Boys. The sport gained a lot of popularity. We mentioned that when the Irish first came, they declared themselves English, or were presumed to be English. Now, through sports and even music, this helped the Irish now become Irlandés, to show their identity off even more, no longer needing to assimilate into the general English-speaking community. William Bulfin was the instigator behind it. Using his position as the editor of the Southern Cross, he published official rules of hurling and a diagram of the playing field on August 17, 1900. Envisioning it as an official branch of the GAA to help Irish Argentines maintain their cultural identity. He was instrumental in the original formation of the Buenos Aires Hurling Club. James Patrick Hart was the first president. He was the first administrative leader, while Bulfin provided the platform. They were recognised in a 1934 letter to the GAA Jubilee Congress as the figures who started the game in Argentina. Miguel Ballesti was responsible for reviving the sport after it had nearly vanished during World War I. In August 1920, he convened delegates from various clubs to organise the sport properly, leading to the grounding of the Argentine Hurling Federation. I found it difficult to pinpoint exactly who set this in motion, but I think it's fair to say it's a bit more complex than pushing a button. So the 3 people mentioned were all key in keeping things moving. But again, with the outbreak of World War II, the wood required to make hurleys were halted. Irish ash wood was light and they couldn't import it anymore. Attempts were made to use native Argentine wood failed, because the timber was too heavy and lacked pliability. Faced with this lack of equipment and growing internal discord caused by the insularity and the physical violence of the game, rugby and field hockey became even more popular. It was used to preserve the institution until things eventually got better, and to today, the hurling club still stands strong thanks to people like Ronnie Quinn.
Hockey coaches that Gaelic football and hurling are good for development of their sports.
Ronnie Quinn himself had served as the chairman and president of the hurling club, and he has some fantastic articles that you can read much more into the history of the hurling club and the Irish Argentine community. So I'll put links in the description down below if you want to check them out. I highly recommend it. Before you go, if you could check if you're subscribed, but also hit that like button while you're at it, I would really appreciate it. It really helps the video reach more people on YouTube. So I hope you enjoyed watching and learning a bit about Irish Argentine culture and history. The music, the whole lot, because I sure learned a ton. The connection of the 2 countries is really overlooked in my opinion. So the more people know about it, the more they can respect it. Also, if you're interested, you can check out the shop where I have a load of St. Patrick's Day themed stuff up there at the minute. If you use the promo code ST.PAT, you will get that 10% off at checkout. Have a browse anyway when you've time. As well as that, I would like to give a huge shout out to our channel members. Here's your names up on screen now. Thanks a million for all your support. I'm running out of compliments for you all, really. You already know you're absolute legends at this point. But seriously, thank you as always. I couldn't be making these videos without your support. If you'd like to join them, look for the join button down below or check out the links in the description for more information. But that's it for me. I won't keep you any longer. Thanks for watching, and I hope you all have a great day. Slán go fóill. Cheers.
Well, thank you for your time. We really enjoyed this, and we hope that you like the music and follow us on social media. And yeah, see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.